Thank you for having me.
Good to have you. So I said this to you before we got started, but I'll say it to you again. I'm surprised because your number is higher than the Alliance for Quality Education. Their number they are seeking is 1.9 billion in the first year.
Yes.
So you're looking for something a little bit more than that.
Right. We're looking for something that gives school districts sort of the light at the end of the tunnel. What we're doing is we're phasing in the foundation formula, which was promised in 2007, 2008 school year, and we're phasing out the GEA, which was implemented in 2010 to close a budget gap. And in order to do that over a 3-year period, you need a certain amount of money, and that money adds up to $2.6 billion a year or $7.7 billion over 3 years. So it's just a mathematical formula and how we arrived at that.
Which would you prefer, actually? Do you want the money or do you want the relief more?
Well, I sort of leave that up to the legislature. I know, the state cannot manufacture, money and print money, and so we're looking for a down payment. We're looking for a combination of things that they can do. The mandate relief, we've talked about it. The governor's talked about it. Everybody wants to do something, but nothing has materialized so far. There was only one thing in last year's budget, or this past budget, about mandate relief, and that was something that we proposed. It had to do with internal audits. They removed the requirement for internal audits for school districts of less than a certain size.
That
was the only mandate relief entirely in the state and the governor's.
And it wasn't really money.
Much. It wasn't a lot. It was about $4 to $6 million a year.
Right.
Well,
like the administration would say we did do mandate relief because we created the 6th tier in the pension fund. Over 30 years, that's going to save a lot of money.
Right.
But in the short term, that puts you still at a disadvantage.
Yeah, eventually that will save us money. I think according to TRS, there was like maybe 9,000 people hired in tier 6 so far, but there's 250,000 people in the other tiers.
Right.
So it's going to take a while before you get to that savings. And talking about TRS and the pensions, it's like the pension smoothing option. Only one school district has taken up that offer of the pension smoothing. So that was a complete bust, which we predicted. So TRS
Why is that though?
Basically, what our folks had said, it's just really kicking the can down the street, and we're not in favor of doing that. We want prudent fiscal decisions now, not postponing them till later.
Does your number 7.7 billion include pre-K, universal pre-K?
No, it doesn't. No, this is really foundation funding and GEA.
So it just makes you whole after the cuts and with the promises of the CFE settlement, et cetera. This would make districts whole.
Correct. Yes, and we do it in a balanced way because, as our report says, is that some school districts benefit from the restoration of the GEA, and some benefit more from funding the foundation formula. So there's some overlap, but some benefit more than others. So we did a combination. And this is what the legislature has done anyway. Being a political body, they say, well, we want to please everybody, so let's divide the baby in half and give some money to GEA and some money to foundation, and that's what we're doing, basically the same thing.
So the governor, though, says that if all goes well and they hold the cap on spending through the end of this fiscal year, there will be $2 billion left in surplus.
Just right about money to fund our increase in education.
Unfortunately for you, it has already been spent 9,000 ways to Sunday.
Yes.
No, the governor says he wants to provide tax relief.
Right.
And certainly that's something you must be sensitive to. The people who fund districts largely are funding the districts through property tax revenue.
Right. Well, I think the governor has already offered tax relief through the tax cap.
Yes.
And is what he's saying that the tax cap isn't providing property tax relief?
Well, I think the tax cap actually, I'm not going to get inside the governor's head, of course, but I think the tax cap doesn't stop growth. It merely caps growth. So the taxes, which were high, continue to grow, and they are now higher than they were before the 2% cap was put in place, obviously, but they're growing at a slower rate. So the taxes remain high.
Relatively, yes. Next year, the tax cap is going to be even less than it was this current year because inflation, it continues to dive. I think in October, the inflation rate was a negative number. And so I think so far, our calculations are that next year's tax cap or the inflation rate will be around 1.5, 1.6%, which is less than the 2%. So we're going to be able to raise less money from local levies next year, which is why we need to make it up in additional state aid.
You also, part of your 2014 priority list includes a technical amendment to the cap. Is that something, what is that about?
Well, there are flaws to the tax cap. Just like there were flaws to the SAFE Act. The governor came back and they made some changes to the SAFE Act. There are flaws in the tax cap legislation. And we're trying to address those flaws because for the last 2 years, we've had a dozen school districts each year have basically negative tax levies, where the calculations ended up that they had to raise less money this year than they did the previous year through the calculations. And that shouldn't be happening. They should just go back to at least zero,
Right.
or stay the same. So we had 12 of those school districts twice in 2 years in a row had negative tax levies. There's the issue where pilots, the payment in lieu of taxes, actually hurts a school district. If a community wants to support economic development and grants a pilot, those pilots actually hurt the school district and their ability to raise revenue going forward. And there's the issue with the capital exclusion.
Right,
Because many
for BOCES.
or for BOCES and for school districts, because what happens is you only count, there's an exclusion from the tax cap for a capital expenditure.
Right.
So only in the year that you actually build something do you get an exclusion.
Right, but paying for building something is usually through bonding, and that's a multi-year experience.
It's a multi-year expense, but you're disincentivizing school districts to put money aside every year to save for a capital project. So what we want is, when you put money aside in your capital budget,
you don't want it to count towards the cap.
we want it, we don't want it to count towards the cap. We want it to be part of the exclusion, because you're incentivizing then people to save. We want people to save. We want people to save so they don't have to borrow money to pay for a capital project. So,
right.
Yeah.
Do you have any feeling, I mean, I know that a lot of people are talking, of course the administration's already putting together the 2014-2015 executive budget, so do you have any feeling about what's going to be in there or how this request would be received?
Well, the Education Reform Commission had their last hearing a couple of weeks ago or 2 weeks ago in Yonkers.
And would be expected to make some recommendations
right,
to the governor soon.
Like they did last year.
Yeah.
They came out in late fall, early winter with some recommendations, and the governor included that in his budget proposal and State of the State. So I think that's going to happen again this year. We're hoping they address the school finance issue, and it's a big issue because we can't do our jobs, we can't provide a quality, sound basic education without the necessary resources. And they're tied together.
Does it hurt you at all that sort of the hot topic right now is universal pre-K? I mean, that everybody's talking about universal pre-K and how the governor's going to fund it vis-a-vis the election of Bill de Blasio in New York City. And there are these sort of issues that we've been talking about for years and nobody's really talking about them all that terribly much.
I endorse universal pre-K. I think it's a great investment in our kids' future and education, because the earlier you start learning, the better off you are. But we have school districts now who are cutting back on kindergarten, and so why are we talking about universal pre-K when there are schools across the state who are going, they were going full-time kindergarten, now they're going back to half-time kindergarten, or they may be eliminating their kindergarten. So, we're talking about doing pre-K when we don't even have the money to fund kindergarten.
Also, not on your list of priorities, but I know a hot topic, Common Core.
Yes. Well, there are a lot of added expenses for Common Core. There was no money for Common Core other than the Race to the Top, which was completely insufficient. And so, we're hoping that the governor sets aside some of his competitive grants, perhaps, to fund Common Core and the testing and all the technology that's required, the additional textbooks, and particularly the professional development.
Well, but the competitive grants, that program has not been terribly successful.
No, we want to ditch the the competitive grants because
you want to have him use the money as opposed
redirect
to
the money so it can be used. So instead of being a competitive grant program, allocate $75 million to grants to all the school districts to implement Common Core.
And you're worried a little bit that the legislature might go overboard because they're hearing it from all their constituents about how much they're upset about the Common Core, and if they go and try and address that legislatively, they might go a little bit too far.
Yeah, I mean, the Common Core, we're part of a consortium called the Education Conference Board. It's made up of teachers and superintendents and PTA and school board members, and we've all endorsed the Common Core. It's the right thing at the right time. The latest international tests that just came out shows again, the U.S. is still falling behind other countries, so we need to move forward with higher. Common Core means higher standards. We want higher standards for our kids so they can compete in a global economy, in a global climate, and in order to do that, we need the resources to implement Common Core. There have been other sort of ancillary issues, teacher evaluations and the testing, and which are not really part of Common Core. They're just adjuncts to Common Core, and so we shouldn't be throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We want to make some adjustments. We want to make some tweaking, but we still want to go forward with it.
Well, it's a very long laundry list.
Yes,
it seems to be getting rather actually longer as the days go by. We'll be following it, obviously. I thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.